Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. Sorry for my former rant of a video. I'm going to be talking about, I guess, a couple things in just a moment, but I do want to mention that during this time, our brain and humanity has been used to getting split into thinking or behaving on an extreme end of the spectrum. America is a little bit more extreme than other countries, and so this polarity is kind of what always wins, especially with algorithms online. The more polar opposite the suggestions or videos or the content, that's kind of what gets a lot more recognition, or at least getting bumped up toward the higher end of the algorithm. The human mind and our brains were not meant to have exposure to this much information and opinions and news forecasts that come from all over the globe. And oftentimes we tend to move like a ping pong ball. We're getting kind of ping ponged in one direction and then into the other. And it is really, really important to keep up with everything as well as absorbing all of that information and while staying calm. I think throughout these chaotic times, we need to have a middle ground perspective, which is being very realistic and aware of things that are happening, as well as looking at kind of pattern recognitions that are happening within your local community or region or state, say like county, state, nationally, as well as internationally. It's not that people don't care about one thing or the other. It's just most of us have to focus so much on our own survival for ourselves and our jobs and our income and our families that is really hard to balance all of it. When we are looking at analyzing a situation or analyzing trends or patterns, we have to understand that that's not always being negative. It is realistically looking at the facts and the patterns of things that are happening. Most of these science people, a lot of them, ironically, are tech and business people that want to look at, they want the data. They want data on things, but they don't want to believe the data because their feelings are on the other end of the spectrum with whatever agenda or propaganda is happening at the same time. So we have to be aware, learn how to stay calm, celebrate the serenity that is within your life. So if you're not living in a high volume, chaotic area, I think that's going, that's great. Now, I do think that we are all starting to get affected. And once I'm ending this video, I hope it starts to understand things a little bit better. We are all starting to get affected. It has started predominantly in the cities by making them awful, horrible, loud, chaotic places to live where people have wanted to move to the suburbs or move rural. There might be some rural areas that will never get touched or tainted or anything like that. But, I've saw videos of people who said they live out in the sticks and they had government officials coming to their front door asking them why they did not get their shot. That never happened to me living in a city. So I'm just saying, not that it doesn't happen to me, it doesn't happen to other people, but these things are happening. This big brother is keeping its eyes out everywhere. I do think at some point we all might be affected, and maybe the people who will be the least affected will be the ones who are living in van life, who can just pick their shit up and move on to somewhere else. At the end of August, I went camping up in Darrington, which I mentioned in the last video, is in the Mountain Loop Highway. And if you do know anybody that lives in Washington State, I hope you can forward this to them because it is really important to know. I talked to a guy at a brewery, and I don't drink alcohol, but my husband wanted to try the local brewery, so we went there, and I started chatting to this guy who's lived out in Washington State, I believe since 1986. He lives, I'm not going to say because the guy's completely freaked out. He really is scared. He lives in one of the towns that are in the Mountain Loop Highway, and his house is on the Skagit River. Well, him as well as his neighbors who live on the Skagit River, they all built their houses there. So these houses have been built in the mid-century or earlier. They all got letters from the state of Washington. Pretty much simple terms, the state wants its land back. The state does not want people living on the Skagit River. They have threatened these individuals. The individual I spoke to, they have threatened him numerous times. They said that the state is going to be hiring the biggest and the best lawyers. So this guy who lives in the house cannot afford really high legal fees to fight for his right to stay. He was stating that there is a very high chance that the state is going to win this fight and this battle. The state has threatened to take the land back to make it into a park so all of the public can enjoy the land and the river and not him. In addition, he mentioned that all of his social media content has been looked at and watched. He said he cannot say anything online that goes against any sort of criticism against the river or the government or the land, because they can use that piece of evidence in court against him. So this guy worked in energy, I think for the government essentially, or at least worked for a company that was contracted with the government in terms of energy, all of the power lines and stuff. So the guy knows how this stuff works. Him and many other people have been against certain things. I think the dam and some other things that have happened on the Skagit River, or just rivers in general in the state of Washington that I'm not well versed on. They have been against certain things that have happened because it has affected the salmon, the salmon runs, and affected the wildlife. He said he cannot make one criticism online because if he does, the state will use that like, oh, he's against this type of thing, and he's not an advocate for the climate because the government has its own agenda and perception of what it means to save and help the climate, that they can use that against him to make it look like he is an unfit citizen and should not be living on the river. He doesn't know where to go or what to do. But him and his neighbors are just in this waiting game to see what will happen. I think because he's originally from Detroit, and I think because he's lived out here for so long that he's become so passive. Like most people in the Pacific Northwest are very soft and passive people. Now, what has also been going on, I have one of my estate sale friends lives out in that Lake Chelan, Wenatchee area, which is high desert. So it does get a lot of forest fires out there. And I just spoke with her the other day because I heard the news article that came out through NPR, which is about people in California, state of Washington. This is also going to happen in Texas and Colorado, where people are starting to get dropped from their homeowners insurance because they live in a high risk area for fires. My friend said her insurance company has tried doing that stuff many times, and they've also gone through the preventative measures, which has moved out a lot of any sort of flammable brush that has been in, but they are within a far enough zone or a legal zone, I think something within 40 miles. So even like the last fire that happened, they were still 40 miles away and were not affected at all. So some of this NPR report that I heard on the radio, the journalist was talking about how eventually this might force people to have to sell and move. So if you start to look at all of this stuff that's happening, it is really scary because along with the 15-minute agenda and the government wanting its land back, it seems like the rural people might also be in another battle that is completely different from what the city people are in. The city people are going to be poisoned, essentially, from the air to the water to all the 5G that is going on, crazy mandates and stuff that are required at certain jobs. So we're all I'm not saying everybody's going to be hit. And once again, this is not like fear-based mongering. This is just like making we have to have like intuition along with making wise decisions to better help ourselves. And so now hearing about certain things like people who live in the Mountain Loop Highway on the river, they might get pushed and forced out of their home. That's extremely scary because these people have lived in a peaceful area for a very long time, and that has been part of the escape that we dream of what's getting promoted now, and escaping this matrix. That's the buzzword that everybody's using, or escaping the city and moving out to somewhere fancy. So if certain lawsuits and public policies can, if they're changed, that's going to really dramatically start affecting people from everywhere. So if people cannot live in these rural areas because of climate and because the government, has its panties in a bunch, where are they going to move? They're probably going to have to move to the more suburban area, or maybe back toward the city. Another news article that I saw, this must have been in 21 or 22, because people have to remember the virtual workforce was like a 3-year lifestyle change out here. Things didn't really start going back in between. I mean, some companies started it in May of 22 all the way out through at some time this year. So people have had, dramatic lifestyle changes. Out in Cle Elum, so you could look at the map, that's pretty much the borderline that transitions between like western and central Washington. So you kind of get a little more high desert. It's the last little bit of kind of green, mountainy, rolling hill area that you'll get before it kind of goes into that high desert, dry landscape. People out in Cle Elum were getting such major rent increases during the COVID pandemic time. They could no longer afford to live in places like Cle Elum, and because their 1-bedroom apartment went up to anywhere from $1,600 to $2,000, these people started moving back to the city, back to Seattle, to get a higher paying job to pay similar, a little bit higher rent for their apartment. So if you start to look at your local state, start rummaging through these news articles and start seeing what is getting affected for you. Now, I do believe that, some people, maybe that co-creation, you're living a great moral lifestyle, you're in a very secluded area, you might not be affected by it, but people are getting affected by this that are in the rural and kind of out there in the sticks type of area. It's going to happen to all of us at some point. We've already gotten affected by all these bullshit federal policies, and now it's like, what's going to be happening on our state, county, and local levels? A lot of people are trying to leave Seattle because it's become a complete dump. That's just the reality. Maybe I should do a video to see the extreme homelessness. They clean up one area, they move them to one spot. Once the Major League Baseball All-Star event came in, they all left South Seattle and they all moved back to Ballard. It's just a migration. The root of the problem isn't getting resolved. It's just shifting the problem from one part of the city to the other. So yeah, anyways, I wanted to share that because that is a major thing. I've checked with legislative groups on Telegram that I've known to try to figure out how to help this guy. Nobody knows what to do because we've been so disconnected from this stuff that it seems like the only thing that he needs to do is contact a lawyer. But can you imagine? What if you don't have the money for that? What if you've been retired for a long time? You've been living in this area for 20 to 30 years, not getting bothered for that long, for several decades. And then all of a sudden, your state government is threatening you and surveillancing you all because you live in a peaceful, natural area. You would expect that in a city. So anyways, I wanted to share this. And if you know anybody in the state of Washington, this is really, really important information because, this Democratic state is I don't even think it's a Democratic state. First of all, I don't even know what the hell happened in the last election because it seemed like people started getting pissed off. But my whole point is, you look at these states that are Democratic, you have Democratic cities, and then you have red across the whole state. They're red states with Democratic cities in it. I don't really know what the solution or the answer is because I try to keep my eyes out on both sides that, everybody, we're kind of all getting played here. So it's using a lot of analytics and wisdom to help move through to make wiser decisions and hope to God that we don't continue to get deceived by all these, freedom fighters that are coming up on these platforms. It's one big psychological psyop after another, after another, after another. And our attention is going from one side to the other. I mentioned about Maui in one of the former videos, and I didn't, it happened on August 8th, which is Lionsgate, which a lot of your astrologers and Reiki people use it as a date of like manifesting what you want. And then I forgot until like just recently that there is a movie, I think it's a movie production company that's Lionsgate as well. So, you have Paramount, you have MGM. So, I don't know. It's a mess. And if you have any thoughts or comments, I'd love to read about it. And if you live in a rural area or off the grid, I think that's great. I hope all is going well. I could see places, somewhere like out in Arizona where, that's like survival land out in that harsh, dry land that you kind of have to figure everything out. That I could see that getting less affected, but the ball is rolling, and it's, again, not to freak anybody out and think that you got to start going to a CrossFit gym and get prepped with ammo and all this stuff. I think there's a balance point here, and if shit hits the fan, hopefully God can help you out. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.